Welcome to the seminar session from the QNJAC Geotechnics Working Group. My name is Paul Joel, and I'm the recently elected chairman of the group. And I'd also like to introduce my colleague down here, Steve Hopkins, who is going to be presenting with me today. Now, you'll have heard today from other speakers regarding QNJAC and what it stands for and how it works. So I don't really intend to go over that ground this afternoon. I've used the term working group here, and we'll try and stick to that as part of this presentation, but you may have heard references to subcommittee, and for this purpose it's really one and the same thing. The focus of the QNJAC and its activities is centred upon a series of working groups established to support the main QNJAC committee. And it is said that the overall purpose of the QNJAC is to debate and develop health and safety policies together with implementation strategies. Sorry, it's not changing on here, but it's changing up there. So in the first part of this seminar session, we're going to try and explain the reasoning for and the purpose of a geotechnics working group, and to try and give answers to a series of questions on the screen. Our aim during the seminar session is not to try and give an element of specific geotechnical training, but to rather introduce you to the activities and purpose of the working group. The one thing that all of the participants in our industry can share, including our competitor companies, is that of best or good practice in the management of health and safety. And at the end of this short 20-minute session, there should be enough time for Steve and myself to take any questions that you may have. So first of all, why? Why do we have a geotechnics working group within QNJAC? Well, point one is around giving clear guidance to good practice as applied to the management of geotechnics within the quarrying and extractive industries. Please note the use of the words good practice. We very often hear of the term best practice within industry. However, this implies that a state of perfection is achievable here and now, whereas in reality, I'm sure that you will agree that there is always going to be room for improvement. The second point is around ensuring that good practice guidance we develop is linked to the requirements of current legislation and regulation. In the case of geotechnics, this is likely to be largely linked to the requirements of the Quarries Regulations 1999. Just a little bit of information about the working group itself. These are all volunteers drawn from different parts of the industry, along the lines of the QNJAC tripartite approach. The shape and composition of the working group can change over time, and is dependent upon individual commitments, but also on the kind of guidance that is being worked on at any one time. The working group meets quarterly to review its programme of work. The workload itself is shared between smaller groups of members who will continue to develop new guidance in the background and in the intervening periods between quarterly meetings. So who is the working group? Well, this is a list of the current members, and hopefully you can see from that the variety of backgrounds from which the membership are drawn. So these include the HSE, geotechnical specialists and consultants, trade bodies, training organisations, coal producers, independent stone producers, and major industry employers. The Geotechnics Working Group are considered by many to have been one of the most productive QNJAC working groups in terms of the guidance output produced to date. As newly elected chairman, I cannot claim credit for that. However, as well as the team listed on the slide, I would like to pay tribute to the leadership of the outgoing chairman, Viv Russell, who has stood down from the working group but will continue to play an important role in the activities of QNJAC. So what is the guidance that the working group have been producing? Well, it's free, and we shall come on to the detail of how to access it, some of which you've heard already. It is also designed in such a way as to be useful across the whole industry. The working group also attends seminars and other events in order to present to various industry groups, such as IOQ meetings. I just want to spend a little bit of time on the word geotechnics. The term geotechnics, in its narrowest sense, is concerned about our human interaction with the rock or the below-ground environment within which we work. And if you go onto the Wikipedia entry for geotechnics, it expands on that a little bit further. It says it's the application of scientific methods and engineering principles to the acquisition, interpretation, and use of knowledge of materials of the Earth's crust. It's various materials and processes towards making the Earth more suitable for human activities and development. However, the quarries regulations themselves are also specifically concerned with the safety of personnel. So Regulation 6, which we saw in one of the presentations earlier, talks about it being the duty of the operator of every quarry to take the necessary measures to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, that the quarry and its plant are designed, constructed, equipped, commissioned, operated and maintained in such a way that persons at work can perform their work assigned to them without endangering their own health and safety or the health and safety of others. So, in summary, geotechnics, when applied to our industry, is about applying an engineering approach to ensuring the safe design, etc., and that our excavations and tips which are present, so it's basically the safe design, operation and maintenance of the excavations and tips which are present at our quarries and at our extractive operations. This can be extended to creating and maintaining features such as edge protection bunds, which are constructed in order to protect personnel during their interaction with such features. So how? The approved guidance documentation and toolbox talks are available on the QNJAC website, www.quinjac.com, and also from the safequarry.com website. And in addition, as mentioned by Mike Phillips, there is also the QNJAC app for mobile devices, both Android and Apple, which is free. And I think everybody heard that talk this morning, so I won't go into that any more detail on that. So I'm now going to hand over to Steve, who's going to give you a little bit more information about what QNJAC, the Geotechnics Working Group, have done to date.
Right, good afternoon, everybody. In my segment, I'm just going to highlight what as a group we've achieved to date. And Paul's going to come back up then and give some details as to where we're planning to go in the future. As Paul said, we've got some questions and answer time at the end, but if you want to interrupt me at any time, feel free, and I'll do my best to answer. Right, the slide up there shows the 6 guidance documents that we've produced already. Within each of these 6 documents, there must be hundreds of hours of deliberate thought, debate, and probably coupled with thousands of hours of experience gained during work time and other times. So as such, we are confident these are very good documents. They're as good as any guidance you might be able to buy. And furthermore, as said earlier on today, they're all accredited by the HSE. So again, they're a reliable, good document. And I understand, the name of this conference is Intelligent Quarrying, which certainly and rightfully encourages the use of technology. And I am a big fan of the technology. I've got a Twitter account, there's social networking, cloud storage, mobile devices, the GPS that you can have on equipment, all excellent stuff. And it makes my life easier, it makes us better, it makes us a better industry. But we need to make sure that because it's so easy to transmit this information nowadays, you could make a document within 20 minutes. It could be across the industry on your handheld devices. It's more important now, I would suggest, than ever, that we need to make sure that the documentation is good, it's correct, it's properly thought out. And I think this is why we are, as a group, very proud of what we produced. It's not as flash and as exciting as some of the technology, but in these guidance notes, there is something that's extremely relevant and extremely useful to everybody in this room. Just to give a flavour then of the type of work that we are doing, I've chosen our last document, or last guidance document, which is the abandonment or ceasing of operations at quarries. We chose to look at this area because during our discussions and given the economic downturn following 2008, there were a lot of sites that were either mothballed or temporarily or long-term closed. And we thought this is a good topic to provide some guidance on. And unlike all of the issues in our industry, the information's there. It's in the relevant regulations, the relevant legislation, the relevant guidance. But we see our role really as capturing all of that guidance with our own knowledge, distilling it into a document that's useful and easily transmitted. Like a lot of these things, the first thing we did, and I dare say this probably took longer than you might imagine, was just to find the definitions and understand what we're talking about. You know, what does abandonment mean? What does ceasing operations mean? So when you pick up our document, that's the first thing you will see. So again, within the business, within the team, within the organisations, we're all talking about the same thing. We all know what we're talking about. And right, let's move on. Yeah, so the first thing we did was work on the definition. What's on the next slide then is the contents of the document. And it's a document of just 7 pages, so it's accessible to anybody without having to spend hours sitting down and reading through it. And the first thing we looked at was how the operator is to engage with the relevant authorities, how we notify, or who to notify if the quarry has ceased, how to do it, what the addresses are. So we cover that in the document. Next, then, we looked at the duties of the operator. Of course, we all know that we should leave the place in a safe condition, but then, and that doesn't need to be re-emphasised, but it's providing guidance again of what safe actually means. The document also provides links to various other documents, such as those relating to footpaths, who you might need to contact. For example, if your quarry is near a coal working area, you may need to notify the coal board that you're ceasing operations. And even fencing. You know, whilst our group specifically hasn't spoken about fencing or discussed fencing, there is QNJAC guidance on fencing. And if you use the document in an electronic version, electronically, there are links within the documents. You can click on the link and you get taken to the fencing documentation. So I think these are, I don't want to dwell on this, but I'm sure you get the point that we go through all of the areas that would be considered important and necessary to understand and implement and put them into the document. And in my own experience, they're very useful. We have them on excavations and tips rules, which is good guidance. And they're very useful. And in order to present these documents and to make them partly future-proof, but also more useful, we do condense them into a flow chart with simple yes-no questions. So if you're uncertain as to what you should be doing, who you should be contacting, what's relevant, what isn't, you simply work through the flow chart, and at the end, you should get the answer. Maybe at the time this wasn't thought to be the case, but this sort of approach probably lends itself to some sort of application that you could use on a device where you could answer these yes/no questions, and at the very end you get you get guidance as to what you should do, which I presume is something that within the industry we would all like. Now, Paul's going to come up in a second and discuss where we're going next, but what Paul's going to cover is the fact that this is documentation you need to fetch yourself, but there is an acceptance, I think, that we need to start presenting the information to the wider workforce, and which is why toolbox talks are beginning to form the next stage of our development. But I'll leave Paul take that on for us.
So as Steve says, we're just going to talk a little bit about what next. As we speak, the committee are working through the final stages of guidance on quarry design. And this will incorporate all the good practice that can be gleaned from the industry via the working group. Just a point on quarry design. Good design, we feel, is essential, particularly in the UK, where climate and groundwater can have a detrimental effect upon the rocks in which we are operating. And the complexity of the geology itself can also have a significant impact on the slope angles that are deemed to be safe and sustainable. So it's very unusual for our quarries and extractive operations to be designed in such a way that a one-size-fits-all approach would be suitable. Moving on from that, our first guidance note was issued in 2009, and the working group recognises that we'll need to have a rolling programme of updates and reviews to take account of new thinking and innovation when considering good practice. So an ongoing review process is therefore being established within the working group to actually take that forward, and we need to devise a suitable method for alerting people as to when the new updates have been completed. We'll also need to keep abreast of emerging technologies and how these can help us in our day-to-day management of the sites. I mean, there are lots of interesting technologies around, some of which we heard about today, drones being one of them. In the simplest form, these can be used for photographing inaccessible areas, but they could also be used for measuring potential hazards, such as rockfall. Another area of interest is around smartphones. The newest generation of colleagues within our industry expect to have a technological fix for every activity that they get involved with. Smartphones could be used to record quarry inspections, for example, of every type, providing greater scope for capturing detail, including photographs, linked to the inspection. This technology will therefore transform the ability of the organisation to measure and monitor potential geotechnical hazards as they develop, and will also lead us away from our love of paper-based tick box systems, which can easily become a burden. Finally, the emphasis of the working group has been refocused towards producing toolbox talks, which are full of good practice drawn from across the industry, with accompanying illustrations and photographs, and which can be used in a wide variety of workplace situations. There is one toolbox talk already published on QNJAC.com and is also available on the app. And Steve has previously referred to this, and it is concerned with the inspection of rock faces. And I've copied a couple of slides from the slide pack just to show you what that looks like. There are 32 slides in the pack in total, and they are full of illustrations, photographs and notes giving practical guidance to anyone working on a quarry or extractive site environment. In this slide, there is a good example of an area of face where wedge failure has already occurred. The essential points to look out for are captured as labels on the slide. Although this location has already suffered a failure, it illustrates the cause, namely intersecting joints which can give rise to such a failure. This then allows anyone working in the quarry environment to be aware of the conditions which can give rise to such a failure. Mitigating features such as the construction of adequate standoffs and rock trap bunding and subsequent and ongoing maintenance of such bunding can also be discussed at this point. So I'd encourage anyone to have a look on the QNJAC website at this particular toolbox talk. As I say, it's absolutely full of useful illustrations that have been carefully put in there. So in order to get as much good practice into these toolbox talks, we've recently put out a call to the industry, and the idea being that they would send any examples into the committee or into the working group so that we can actually review those and to use that good practice as part of a compilation of a new series which can then be used in the workplace. And I think the purpose really of putting that call out is it's far better to get that good practice which is already out there than for us to sit around the table in a working group and actually start from scratch. So the list of Toolbox Talk projects that we're going to be looking at, and these are going to become available in 2016 if everything goes according to plan, are on the screen, including excavated faces, edge protection, lagoons, tips, stockpiles, and face isolation. I'll just take face isolation as an example. One of the things that that we've been looking at recently in the industry is around adequate measures taken to scan faces in advance of blasting. And the requirements are that you really remove any obstacle that could impede the total scan of the face. And that can sometimes mean removing bunding, which restricts entry into that area. And the requirements of the quarries regulations themselves, Regulation 22, which requires physical barriers to be put in place to restrict entry of people into areas which might constitute a hazardous area. So there's an apparent contradiction there in terms of the requirements and the legislation. So one of the purposes of the Toolbox Talk will be to come up with practical measures that we can use in the industry to actually make sure that we comply and we also keep people safe. It is envisaged that all of the proposed Toolbox Talks will become available, as I said, in 2016. They will be agreed by the group and approved by the HSE before becoming QNJAC branded and subsequently published through the channels that I've already mentioned. The important bit is really to ask you, the audience, and the industry as to whether you have, well, I've talked about the request for guidance material, that you would like to actually distill into the guidance. Steve and I and the rest of the working group members will be happy to hear from you, particularly if you have those materials, photographs or even videos, which you think would be useful in this regard. And that way we can actually influence, in a positive way, the design and operation of our quarries and extraction sites. So that's all we've really got to say on the work of the working group, but if anyone's got any questions, Steve and I will be very happy to try and answer them.
What guidance is there for sand and gravel quarries from a geotechnical point of view?
I mean, you're probably right, and the implication of the question is that there's a lot of focus towards rock quarries.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think we're sort of forgetting about you, and I think we've got a number of people on the committee who are well versed at producing guidance and training. So we've got a member of the MQPC training body on the committee, and I know for a fact that he's well used to giving training to people in the sand and gravel environment.
We missed out to the southeast because they're very much based on
Yeah.
hard rock, and we have
Yeah.
a quarry inspector who's very, very pro getting geotechnical sorted out, and obviously it's an area where we'd like some support.
Yes, and I think as kind of new chairman, I think that's probably something that needs to be raised at the next meeting in January.
It would be appreciated by a lot of people in the southeast.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much.